And we are live. Welcome everyone. Today we're going to talk about, are we still free to speak our truth in the West? So, is there this thing called free speech? And I know that in America the people will say, well, it's constitutional. Yeah, you know what? That may be right, but those are just words on a paper. Are you, even in America, free to speak your mind? And indeed, are we in Europe? And today we're going to discuss that. I have with me St. Clair and Sky and Axel, Real Raven. And I'm not sure if anyone else will join. I did ask a few people, so people may pop in later. If anyone in the chat wants to join, feel free to give me a shout out. And let's see how it goes. I am hoping, well, I'm pretty sure you guys can hear me. I'm hoping you can hear the other guys. We should be vocal, so we're going to give it a try. Who's going to be the first one to say something that wasn't me?
Well, hello. I guess I'll try.
Okay.
It's nice to see you guys after a bit of an absence. I keep trying to be inspired, and I keep failing.
Well, let's check. Guys, did you hear St. Clair there? I hope you did, because if not, then there is something going wrong even I didn't calculate into.
I'll type it just in case.
I haven't seen anyone say they did or didn't hear
Okay.
you.
Michael said that he heard somebody else than you, so that must have been St. Clair.
In that case, first off, hi there Toxic, hi there Michael, hi there Nick, and hi there Ludicrous. And whoever joins in a moment, hi there already. Who wants to kick it off when we're talking about are we still free to speak our truth in the Western world? Who wants to first go?
I guess the question is, are you free to speak everything you want to?
Well, feel free to answer. Did I forget Paolo? Sorry.
Isn't there this old adage that you can speak whatever you like, but you have to live with the consequences? I see plenty of consequences, you know. I mean, as an extension of free speech, I see a lot of YouTube channels being shut down. And it was really interesting. Don't know, have you heard about Agenda 21?
Before we go there, as a consequence of free speech, we see YouTube channels being shut down. Let's start with that one. Is that then indeed a sign of free speech?
Well, it used to be free speech. It didn't used to be shut down. It's just that it's a sign of that people are allergic to it, you know.
So is there free speech? I mean, you say something on YouTube and other people may not agree with you and therefore they shut you down. Isn't that in itself a clear sign that we are limited in our free speech?
Yeah, it is. It's a limitation. Well, I think it's still free speech to the point that they can remove you from the platforms, but that don't necessarily lock you up for it. You know, they don't necessarily. So you talk, you speak freely, but you basically lose the platform. So I don't know.
Three very good arguments could be made on this point, and that is, one, no, it's not a sign that there's an attack on free speech. The majority of people want this video to be taken down, therefore they voice that, and it happens, right? Which is not a very good argument because it's not actually based on anything solid, right?
And it's not majorities. It's usually just a loud minority, isn't it?
A second argument is that no, absolutely not, because you want to say anything and you get silenced. Doesn't matter what it is. If somebody disagrees, bam, you're done, right? And then the third argument can be made, and this is the one that I think is like the best argument, is that it has absolutely nothing to do with free speech, because in this specific instance, it's capitalism. This company's trying to make money stay afloat, and this video right here is detracting from advertisers. They're pulling out. You can actually track that with real numbers. You know, they're losing money because these specific videos, let's get rid of them, bam.
Yeah, but the
Maybe.
truth is that
How's that
the
doing
real
government?
reason, the real reason when we look at YouTube, why did YouTube lose money, is because they let themselves get dragged away in that whole banning sequence. They stopped advertising on people to prevent advertisers pulling out, which, funny enough, caused them to have far less advertisement on their platform. So it's basically YouTube shooting itself in the foot. But
It's not surprising to me that crass capitalism and virtue signaling didn't mix very well.
no. But I'm
Did
not
you
a,
see?
I'm not a fan of crash capitalism. I'm a fan of capitalism, but I'm not a fan of capitalism out of control, so to speak.
Interesting point
one
from
moment.
Toxic.
Real
Crony
Raven,
capitalism?
Real Raven, one moment. One
Okay.
moment.
Yeah.
The problem
Yeah.
we are getting is if a company is able to say, you know what, you're not allowed to say this on my platform, and
Yeah.
companies are allowed to do that. I'm not going to say companies aren't allowed to do that, but there is, how do you call it? They are taking on a certain responsibility. With that responsibility comes more responsibility on them. They don't take that
Yeah.
responsibility. They are willing to say, you're not allowed to say this, but as soon
Yeah.
as someone else does something wrong, they will say, yeah, but it's not our responsibility because
Yeah.
we are a platform, not a publisher. You can't
Yeah,
be both.
It's
So either-
what's it called? The Zuckerberg, not the scenario, the Zuckerberg dilemma. You could call it.
Yeah, you can call
It's
it
like
whatever you want.
He's
but
trying to say two things at the same time. No, we do not censor political speech, and yes, we do censor political speech. It's just depends.
It's not
But
even,
just,
it's not
just
even
this
whether
point-
they censor political speech, yes or no. The problem is, as soon as
Yeah.
they start censoring anything, that's not illegal by
Yeah.
law, they are basically becoming a publisher. And publishers
Yeah.
are responsible for what is being published.
Okay, so but yeah, we talked about this before. Just what do you think of toxic threads? The left. Well, I guess that
Only the left has free speech. Well, that's
only the left has free speech, and
Yeah, I don't think that's
I
the
would
same thing
say
to do
I
with
would say
self-
the left has the opposite of free speech, because if you are on the left and you say the wrong thing, you're actually punished. Often you're punished harder than somebody who's on the right wing, because on the right wing you're basically a lost case anyway.
what did you want to say?
What do you think?
Sky?
The thing is that some people say that's not the government. That's not true, because the government is actually giving these companies subsidies. Like, for example, with Google, they're allowing Google to use public transport for their employees in California, and that's why you have people protesting. So it's like, no, if you're going to get government subsidies, then yes, I have every right to tell you to do right, because my money is being used to keep your company afloat. I'll give you
Or the brother's directly profiting from it.
I'll give you another prime example of that, right? So we bailed out Bank of America, right? And they were going to go under. Well, they decided to not loan any more money to people who want to start a business selling AR-15s. Excuse me, what if that same person had their tax money taken to keep your company afloat? Now you won't loan to them. I think that if anyone wants to start a business selling AR-15s, they should be reimbursed for the money that was being used to keep that company.
Bail out the
Yeah,
Bank of America.
that's not right. That's bullshit.
No, fair enough. Fair enough. But
The government of the people, right?
Ludicrous Leprechaun says YouTube does not give clear guidelines on what can and cannot be shown on their platform, and I think
Yeah.
I can agree.
well, it's not just YouTube. Let's be honest. There are other platforms that do the same, unfortunately, and some of them are compelled to do this because big advertisers or money companies force them. That's not even the main issue I have with this problem, because a lot of people will say, "Well, free speech, therefore the government protects it." Yeah, I'm going to say bullshit. The government doesn't protect free speech for anyone.
Yeah.
I mean, they are supposed to be the last line of defense, but they're not. Because who decides whether someone is being silenced? Now, here's the problem. By silencing people, we are not only depriving the person speaking, but we're also depriving the person listening.
Yeah.
And we are seeing,
But,
for example, this how do you call it, woke culture, the council culture it's been called. The problem with that is not so much that it happens, but that no one seems to have a problem with it. This is book burning 101.
Oh.
Yeah. It
I'm
is.
going to make sure that you're not allowed to see what someone who I disagree with has to say. So, therefore, my original question: do we indeed have free speech in the Western world?
It's. I think it's a gradation.
Yeah.
You know, you can't say there is an absolute free speech. I think that there's grades
Why?
of it. You know, it's like shades of
Why
gray.
can't you say there is an absolute free speech?
I can say there is.
Yeah, you know, I think that one thing that's important is that the government doesn't determine
No, I'm
what's
sorry.
illegal.
I'm going to stop that because people share this or offense with this whole the government argument. It's not about the
Yeah.
government. It's about
It's
society.
just one level. It's
No,
one level.
It's not
you know.
even. It's not even one level because
Big state box.
It's the
governments
difference
are-
between
please let me finish.
communist Russia and
Let me finish my sentence, please.
yeah.
The government is a set body of people that changes time and again. If
Yeah.
we're going to use that set group of people as the final barrier on something, we as a society have failed. Because today the government agrees with me and therefore feels everyone should be free to say what they want to say. And tomorrow
Yeah.
they might agree with someone else who says, yeah, no, but you can't say this.
Yeah.
If
I agree.
we as a society take this as our final barrier, we have lost already. I mean,
Yeah,
this
but
isn't
that's
even
not what
the-
I say. I say
Well-
there's a level of the government keeps out of speech or they regulate it. That's two levels, right? And then there's shades in between. The ideal would be the government to keep out of speech altogether, no regulations, and that they enshrine that in the constitution and say
But
we
the-
keep out of
but the problem-
regulating of speech.
But
I
the
don't know,
problem
in the
we are
United-
seeing now is not coming from the government, even though different governments have different
I know
standings.
that's a different level.
But the main problem.
It's a different level.
But the main.
But should the
problem-
government enforce that? That's the question I have for you. Should the government force Google or whoever to accept all speech, or is that also something that private companies, private people should do? That's the question.
This is something society should mandate. This is not something governments should do. This is something
Yeah.
that we as a society should say, no, we're not going to accept this.
Yeah.
In the United States, I really can't speak for anyone else. In the United States, freedom of speech, as far as the Constitution is concerned, or as far as U.S. law is concerned, is that it specifically protects the citizens from the government from abridging speech that doesn't cause pain to somebody else.
Yeah.
It
But
doesn't
it's
have
not the
anything to do
government.
with private speech, so
Yeah.
they can't go into the They can't go into Alphabet and say, "Hey, Google, you got to censor your shit," or "Hey, my phone's responding to it."
Well, I mean,
You can't go say, "Hey, YouTube, you can't play this, that, and the other." Now, outside of harming somebody, so for example, they can say, "Oh, all right, Google, you need to go ahead and censor this, child pornography or whatever. You need to censor this, this, that, and the other, right? Because it actually physically hurts somebody." But outside of that, the government actually can't go in and say, "Hey, you can't stop them from doing this, or you have to stop them from doing this." So.
But-
Yeah, there's no such thing as free speech in a capitalist sense, in a governmentless way that doesn't has any focus on government, because that's not what it means in the United States.
but
Well, I
so-
think that the market could help with that. I mean, one thing you see, more and more people could start to use DuckDuckGo, for instance, because they see that the game is rigged, and Google has a lot of.
It should be mentioned that freedom of speech is not an idea that has ever existed in a society that is not either a democratic or republican state.
So Nick's Radio, there's three people here with St. Clair. It's St. Clair, Sky, St. Clair's husband, and Devil's Advocate is here. So
I want to add something else about free speech. A lot of times when you bring up the idea of free speech, people say, "Oh, that's only that's only the protection from the government." There's something called the spirit of free speech, right? So the concept is simple. If it constrains the government, why would you not honor it? Like, for example, if you know the government can't just illegally seize and search your your property. That's the whole idea of us not just allowing people to come in to basically come into your home whenever they get ready. So if it constrains the government, why would you not also honor that?
Well, it's even it's.
That should be honored by all societies.
I think one of the bigger problems I personally have with having the government do anything is that the more power we give the government, the more responsibility we take away from ourselves. And if you want to infantilize someone, remove responsibility. That's the best way to infantilize someone.
Yeah. One thing that raises a bit of a red flag is this whole the sentence construct. It should be done by society, because in the end, if something should be done by society, you need either consensus or laws again. So it's a vicious circle. You know, it's very hard to say something should be.
Let's pretend that this is true. Let's pretend that it's a vicious circle and we need clear guidance on it. But what if we're going to say, you know what, you're free to say everything you like on an open platform as long as you don't break the local law. And government will protect you.
Enforcement that would be way too difficult and expensive for anybody to even try and attempt that.
Well, or you can make it a lot more simple. It is in that if you're going to censor people based on what they say, then my whole thing is that, you know, I'll give you a prime example. If you were to look at Twitter, right? Twitter, there are some people, you know, like politicians and people who do emergency services who actually use Twitter to get out, you know, the alerts. Well, in some areas, that's the only alert you really got, because some people, they're under this delusion, this absolute delusion that somehow, some way, you know, everybody has the same city layout that they have. Some people actually use the internet to get their news. So when you ban somebody off of Twitter, you could be, believe it or not, you could be killing them.
Oh yeah.
Yep,
it's true.
I did not know that.
It's like it becomes a public service, and I mean, especially this day and age where more and more people don't have TV anymore. It used to be TV, but you know, a lot of people don't really need TV. You know, to watch shows or whatever, you don't need TV. You only need an internet connection.
Well, in all fairness, Toxic is saying something that is really important, and I think that's the backbone of this whole discussion, and people seem to constantly ignore it. But we will only have free speech when the people are actually willing to claim it.
Yeah,
that's true.
And currently we live in a society where people are actively trying to stop free speech.
That's a worry.
Go ahead.
I mean, if we look for... So go on, Sky, go on.
I was going to point out something else, too, something that a lot of people don't seem to point out. If a federal judge tells the president that you can't even block people on Twitter, how can anyone be banned off of Twitter? If you're telling me that I have to be able to access the president, you're telling the president you can't, you're telling the most powerful man on planet Earth with nuclear weapons that are powerful on levels that I couldn't begin to explain to you, because I serve in the freaking army. I can tell you, we got some shit, man. And if you could tell the guy that controls all that you can't even block people on Twitter, how can Twitter ban me?
Yeah. Which is quite interesting, and I was really looking forward, because when Twitter when the judicial system in America said that the president wasn't allowed to block anyone, with that they automatically transferred public status to Twitter.
Yeah.
Which means Twitter must therefore be a public platform. Which therefore means Twitter is not allowed to ban anyone or block anyone from using its service.
Oh my God.
Which they are doing. So there is a double standard coming back and forth.
What do you think?
What I think?
Way too much.
I'm sorry, what did you say, mate?
Sorry, I think maybe the government might be involved a little too much.
Well, I think government's involvement should be one and one only. Is the law being broken, yes or no?
No.
Well, there you have it.
There's this other thing, which is a bit of a slippery slope. Is this thing? What about harm? You know,
What about harm? Define harm.
harm.
Yep, define harm.
You know,
Before
exactly.
we continue,
That's
what's
the
harm?
problem. I mean, they're working on changing the definition of harm constantly, and like violence, you know, words of violence, and harm is
Personal injury.
basically psychological.
Yeah, so we're talking about 1984 kind of concepts.
Yeah. Just redefining the language.
Freedom is slavery. Words are aggression. But
Words are violent. Yeah.
the thing is, and I once again say to what Toxic said earlier, we will only have free speech when the people want free speech. Now, Leprechaun, I understand it when you say a lot of people do not realize they are being silenced as they are not aware of the culture war. I think you're correct in that. But at the same time, what I find more interesting is not so much that people might not realize they are being silenced. People are actually silencing people because they think this is what they need to do. This sounds silly, but if we look at, for example, the communistic period in Soviet Union, Poland, the East European countries, there was a huge silencing apparatus going on, but it was mostly done by people themselves, because they were afraid that if they said something wrong, other people would then condemn them. This is what's going on in our Western society. You're not allowed to say certain things because not only might it offend someone, no, it makes you a bigot. Now, obviously, we mentioned stuff like this in the past before here, but how many people do you know that will tell you that you're not to criticize a certain religion because you're a something-ophobe, or certain sexualities because you're a something-ophobe?
Well, it is terribly peaceful, and how dare you criticize it?
Well,
Yeah,
I mean,
by definition, right? Religion of peace.
yeah, one piece here, one piece there.
Pieces. Well, pieces. Yeah.
Yes.
But that's not the point. I mean, come on. We're not even allowed to criticize gender dysphoria or the push to normalize gender dysphoria. We're not allowed to criticize any form of gay relationships, which, you know what? I have no problem with people being gay. Hence, I invite gay people to join me. I don't care. You are who you are. What you do with your partner is between you and your partner. But how come I'm not allowed to criticize anyone? Because to criticize anyone, even if I'm 100% wrong, to criticize is the very first thing that our freedom of speech should be protecting. And
Well,
apparently we've
In
lost that.
simple answer to your question, I mean, if you want to know who has the power, look at who you can't criticize. And for most of the world, we spent the 50s, 60s, and 70s, depending on where you were, ensuring that there was some protected class of some kind that couldn't be criticized, couldn't have anything horrible said about them, couldn't even have something mildly unkind said about them. And then from about the late 80s on, basically everywhere in the world, we started expanding who those people were until, well, I mean, you're fine if you're not a white male. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, white males are depending on, I mean, if you're regressively left, then you're decently protected as well. But if you're a white Christian conservative in America, fuck you, man. You're not even a second-rate civilian.
Yeah, exactly.
But this is the funny thing, and this, well, funny, not funny as in ha-ha, but funny as in sarcastic. This is what we see in a lot of Western countries. The indigenous people in their own country are very often second-rate citizens. And not because of the government. No. This comes from people themselves. They have made themselves second-rate citizens. So transgenders rule. Well, in women's sports they do.
Well, I mean,
Well, what did I say on your thing? a woman can do anything a man can do, especially if she still has her balls.
Yeah, that helps.
Well, I mean, I'm not the first to say this. I think Toxic said that in one of the streams a long time ago. We should realize that men are men and women are women, and we're not the same.
It's hate speech.
And that's supposed to be the way. Now, I don't care if a guy wants to live like a woman. What do I care?
This is against the Prime Directive.
But it's a really weird time we're living in, where thing like when you say an X is an X can be actually classified as something bad or as hate speech. An X is an X, a woman is a woman, a man is a man.
Hiker
It's
is
so
a
weird,
transgender male.
That's how far we've come.
Go
That's
ahead.
canon now.
Canon.
That's canon now. Commander William Riker is a transgender male.
Clearly. So why do we find this weird? I mean, this was a major point of power in 1984. The probably most famous scene out of the book or movie is as repeated in Star Trek as it were. How many fingers am I holding up? If I, the powers that be, can get the populace to refuse to call a spade, then I can get them to do anything.
And
I mean, it's not inordinate or strange. It's just creepy.
yeah, and welcome for joining us, by the way, Don. But you're correct.
Thank you.
This is what happens. We went from should we have free speech to no longer even considering whether we should have free speech and who is responsible for our free speech. And I still remain, to be honest, that I don't think governments are responsible for our free speech, but the populace itself is. But we've went from should we have free speech in how dare you not comply to compel speech. And somehow people are blindly following into this. You have the freedom to be compelled.
Yeah.
That's basically where we're at now.
Congratulations to you, I guess.
Yeah, indeed. But this is true. And the funny thing is, because before the stream started, John and I were talking, and John and I had a slight discussion about, according to John, the system is different in the United States than in Europe, because in the United States, you have government-protected free speech, which is not really true, because you don't have government-protected free speech, but you have protection from the government for free speech. That's
a good
not
step.
really the same thing. And
It's a good first step, isn't it? I mean, somebody
it's
with
not.
unlimited resources shouldn't have
no, it's not.
have the.
No, it's not. No, it's not. It's actually.
It's not a good first step.
No, it's actually it's a pitfall.
All right.
Because a lot of
Because
people,
you think.
because a lot of people in America still believe that they have free speech, even though people in America are censored just as much as people in the Western world. But it's not being done by the government.
Censored by private interests rather than the state.
But that's
So
always how it's
look,
been.
there's a massive difference here, and I really hate this conflation, right? So if YouTube kicks me off YouTube, then YouTube kicks me off YouTube. Having recently been banned from Twitter, if Twitter bans me, then Twitter bans me. There is still a whole wide internet. I can still go stand on a street corner and shout whatever it is I want into the wind. Yes, it decreases my reach from what was artificially expanded by a service that I was using. But if the government tells me I can't say a thing, they put me in jail.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's the thing. That's why I say that's one level, there's different levels. And that's why I think, I know what you mean, though, Maud, when it means that you already have free speech from the government, so why do you demand free speech from a corporation? So that's another level.
But that's the main thing. Yes, it's nice that.
Is it, though?
Yes,
Is it, though?
Yes, it is.
Don't you think,
Axel,
like,
please, let me finish.
people in...
Please, 1 sec. It's a nice thing that we are protected from our government. It is a nice thing that we are protected from our government. But our government isn't the biggest influence in our life.
Count your blessings.
But what happens to people when they speak out against certain... how do you call it? holy
Protected
houses,
classes.
protected classes, protected topics. What if you speak out against it?
Uh,
Look at
who's-
what happens. Look at what happens. I'm going to take climate change as a small example for a moment. I've been making a few videos on it lately. I have noticed that there's so much censorship in climate research. There have been publishing houses who basically blatantly refuse to publish any scientific paper that does not agree with man-made global warming.
And you don't think that the government has created that? Because let me tell you when that happened, right about 2010.
No, it's
You know what
older.
else happened in
No,
2010?
it's way older. It's way older. It's way older. I mean, the whole concept of climate change is more than 100 years old.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying the concept of climate change is new.
No,
I'm
but
saying
that people being silenced because of it is just about as old.
no, I mean, look, if you go
No,
back
it's-
to the 80s and 90s,
examples.
you find a lot of Scientific American talking about how we're going into an ice age. And I mean, the beginning of whatever you want to call climate
Yeah,
change now was global warming.
At that point, at that point, the ice age was the perceived future of climate change. Global
Maybe.
warming is relatively new.
So, but regardless, even at the time, you could find people publishing about how it wasn't going to happen, right?
Yes. and
Like whether or not any given particular publisher wouldn't publish articles on it is, I mean, look, they're individual publishers. Who cares? It became a universalized idea that you couldn't speak against. At least in the U.S. in the 70s or something like that, and that is and look, it started to in the 70s. It really became a big deal. You couldn't speak out against it in the early 10s, I guess, and a lot of that had to do with we simply will not provide scientific governmental funding if you say climate change is wrong.
yeah. And I think a large part of that came when they started working with the IPCC as well.
Yeah.
But that was in 1988, I think, if I remember right.
Have you guys heard? I wanted to bring that up earlier, but have you guys heard about Agenda 21? It was really interesting. I saw a stream about it the other day. Like yesterday was day before yesterday was driving to Dublin with my daughter, and I heard the stream, and I heard it kind of just one day after it was streamed, and then I wanted to see the rest of it yesterday. It was removed because of copyright grounds with BBC. But do you know about this Agenda 21 idea?
No.
So that's basically about. It's basically a move towards a world government, and it's a voluntary thing between European and pan-European states. The UNESCO is involved, and the UN is involved, and it was written up in 1992. And there's lots of legislation coming from it, like for instance zoning laws. They want to move people back from the country back into cities, make them more controllable, stuff like that. Just kind of put them in cages, And the other thing is getting rid of national borders, So there's immigration. There's a lot of different things that are tied to it, but a lot of it is actually enacted already in local laws, zoning laws and stuff like that, just regulating everything and basically anything that's independent of a government and that's free or individualistic. That's what they want to rule out, and that's Agenda 21. And we have that. I didn't know that, but we have that since 1992. And it explains an awful lot.
You want a little kick in the junk here? Alex Jones
Yeah.
has been talking about that since like 2001.
Yeah, but the the pact exists since 1992. That's not something I didn't. That's not something I knew before. That's quite interesting. So it's a really old piece.
Yeah, but the funny thing is, they're not even hiding it. It's public.
No. Yeah. And it's weird because
But you're not allowed
I don't
to talk
understand
about
why
it.
governments would vote for basically giving their power away, because that's one of the things, that national government basically is giving up.
The thing is,
that's
I'll say something funny.
very weird.
That was, I think it was. It's somewhere in the United States. I can't remember the state, but there was a UN conference, and we're talking about last month, not even more, because I can remember having the website that told me this story, and I was thinking about making a movie from it. The United Nations were holding a conference or something, or conference I think is the best word. And there were journalists there, and basically the United Nations protecting people, the guards, whatever you want to call them, kicked out the how do you call it, the journalists, claiming that they weren't in the United States anymore. They were now on a United Nations compound, even though it was a privately rented conference hall. I had this article because I did want to make a video about it, but yesterday I think the article was gone.
Oh. Shit.
And I should have made I should have made how do you call it?
Wayback Machine.
Well, I could do that, but I'm lazy too. Let's be honest. But at the same time, this is weird because now, if we look in the United States, people are being told that they are no longer in their own country because the United Nations is holding a conference somewhere, and whether at one point I think this is disgusting, at the same point we've seen this happen in Europe many a time as well.
Yeah, it's actually not new here either. It just doesn't get mentioned very often. But if you go back to the Clinton era, which is 92 to 2000, that happened back then too, and it was people complained about it then, but nothing happened. And Clinton said, "Well, it's fine. We're going to let them." And who knows how long it's been going on before that, but I was at least alive to see it on TV. So,
but yeah, this is something that is. Was it in your
No, I remember this Agenda 21. The whole thing behind it was environmentalism, actually. And the book, she invited this woman who had written a book, Behind the Green Mask. I don't know if it rings any bells, but I just thought I'd mention it. Very interesting. Like to get that now.
Well,
Behind the Green Mask, so it's basically communism, but it's
not basically
dressed
communism.
up. Yeah, it's dressed up as environmentalism, which is interesting.
It's not basically communism.
It is communism.
It is communism. There is a slight difference between something being basically something or something being something. The whole the whole idea with every environmental plan in the Western world at this point in time is to destroy our current economies.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, but
independent local ones.
And
it's globalization. It's globalization. Anything that's local, anything that's independent and local, is basically is attacked, even without the basically.
It's not even that, right? I mean, it's just not to get full Alex Jones here, but it's quite literally just people who hate success because they go after it everywhere unless it grants them some sort of power, and then they go after it when they decide they don't need the power anymore. And some of the best examples of that are telecom companies in the U.S. who, during the 70s to 90s, were 90% plus of all the communication that got done of any variety, especially since they held a lot of stock in cable TV and that sort of thing. And then as we've started to move to the internet, the government started to go back after telecoms again.
Yeah.
You mean go back? You mean in regulation, right?
Yeah. Not just that, suing them, going after them for money, like working on breaking them up and just destroying them in various ways, right? They notoriously, about 3 or 4 years ago, went after Verizon for a boatload of money. And then Verizon started buying into the internet, and all that went away. I mean, look, tinfoil hat on full scale here, but it is kind of a convenient way that this ends up happening, is all I'm saying.
Well, and there is this is basically why I wanted to start to talk about, do we have free speech? And are we still allowed to speak our thoughts?
Yes.
And the question then suddenly becomes, okay, are we allowed to speak our thoughts? Yeah, we are. Okay, but are we?
Yes.
And you say yes. I can name a few people who have been stopped from allowing to be spoken out.
How?
For example, people not allowed going into a country where they were having talks.
It's true.
And yes, this has happened to the USA as well. The USA
So-
has stopped certain people as well from speaking.
Those you run into a problem there, right? Can a nation bar you from its country? Should they be able to? I guess is more accurately the question. And should they have sole discretion to do so? Because unless you're a citizen, right? So if you're a U.S. citizen and you're coming back from France as you went on some journey over there for whatever reason, and you're going to do something the government doesn't like, and they stop you at the border and go, no, you can't come in. That's a very different problem than whatever it was with Australia that was most famous recently, if I recall correctly. Somebody tried to go over there, Lawrence Southern, I think, got to the border and got told, go away.
Yeah,
Right.
well, this happened in Australia, in the UK with other people.
Yeah.
Germany has physically tried to stop someone from entering the country and failed at it miserably, because that's the trouble with big land borders. It's easy to get past. But yeah, the Americans have tried to stop someone getting in as well, merely for giving a speech.
Sure. But again, does the government have sole discretion to say you can't come into the country? And for that matter, is free speech such an international principle that we have to let anybody anywhere into the country simply because, let's face it, they say they're giving a speech?
Maybe. That's a good question. Do countries have the right to say to people, I don't want you here because I don't like what you say?
Poland, I think. Jared Taylor in Poland as well.
So should countries be allowed to say, you know what, I don't like what you say, therefore you can't come in?
Yes.
And if they do so, should they do so publicly?
Well, I mean, if you're going to, then, sack up and say what you did, but that's my personal preference as opposed to what's ever going to happen.
Okay.
I mean, if somebody's coming into your country simply to give a speech, then shouldn't they be escorted?
Well,
I mean,
so
to the effect that they don't do anything illegal.
is it incumbent on a country that someone is visiting that they have to provide what amounts to a police escort to make sure they behave themselves so that they can give a speech?
No, it would depend. It would depend on what the values of the individual country were.
And therein lies the problem, right? So, I mean, we can come up with all these, I guess they could, but
Well,
is there some
I'm going to-
particular
I'm
reason
going to
they
ask-
should?
I'm going to ask
I
a different
wonder,
question though.
do you allow...
Let me pass a little thought experiment here. If you come to my country, I expect you to uphold my laws because you're guests, right?
Yeah, I mean, makes sense.
Okay, so now you come here to give a talk. Basically, if I say you can't come in because of the talk you're going to give, I'm not only stopping you from giving your talk, but I'm basically telling my citizen, you're not allowed to listen to this person.
Yeah,
Yeah.
How is that then
even more
not,
so.
How is that then not censoring?
That's thought control. It's not just speech, right? Because like receiving speech is basically trying to control thought.
No, not really. So, look, is there Is this the only person on the planet espousing this idea? I mean, there's a lot there. You're not simply controlling thought because you won't let one person in. If I don't know, by some miracle of way, you could limit every single person on the planet who held this idea from getting into your country, then first of all, are your citizens asking for it? And if they are, how are they asking for it? Because they have to know of the idea to be asking for it,
True
right?
that.
I mean, there are just logical contradictions there that are a very serious problem.
I have a principled question for Mordwain. Do you think that taboos are something that societies should not have, or do you think that there is a reason for taboos, a societal function for taboos?
Well, taboos
Let's say, for
do-
instance, taboos.
have
Let's
a
say
societal
whatever.
function.
Let's say child pornography or something. For instance,
Whoa! Stop! Because now you're you're conflating two things. You're conflating taboos.
Oh, I think you're just moving a goalpost there.
No, you're conflating two things.
It was a straightforward
A
question.
taboo is something else than.
All right, okay.
accepting-
Let's just answer my question then. So
A
taboos are
taboo
okay,
is
right?
No, I'm not saying a taboo is okay, but you're trying to put taboos in the same category as child pornography. Somehow I can't conflate
That
the
was
two
just an
because
example.
It's
It was
not.
an example.
It's not even an example. Your
Can
example.
we
Okay, then
go
you
with-
give me a better example. If
Okay,
Can we
it's a
go
bad
with
example.
don't spit on the sidewalk?
For example, a taboo is behavioral, but it's not criminal. Child pornography
Taboo
is
is
criminal.
also something you can't talk about often, like taboo
Yes,
topics.
But to conflate a taboo thing with something that is criminal, a criminal act, that's not the same argument.
I don't know. I think
we're
you're moving
coming-
goalposts,
No,
because
this
people
is-
were killed for breaking taboos, by
That's
law. They
something-
were
that's
killed
something-
or.
That's something completely different. But you cannot compare a taboo with child pornography.
Oh,
If
okay. Well,
child
you're just
pornography-
going off on a tangent. I'm really talking about taboos, and I don't care what your
Okay.
good example for taboo
I'm
is.
not-
What
I'm
I'm
not-
talking about is that I think that there is a similar mechanism between taboos and free speech. That de facto you can't say trans people are not real women or whatever. That's a taboo at this stage. It turned into one.
Yeah,
But it
but
seems to be
that's-
a similar mechanism, and I think
Yeah,
that
well,
there is
let
a
me answer your
societal
question then.
a societal function that is important with taboos. I just can't put my finger on this. That's all.
Let me answer your question then. Am I in favor of taboos? No, I really think we shouldn't have taboos at all. The reason why
No society should have taboos.
sorry,
No society should
no
have taboos.
society should have taboos.
Okay.
Everything should
Interesting.
be open to be talked about. The reason why I'm so adamant about pointing out that your example of taboo and child pornography is the wrong one is because where I am quite clear on that I don't want any taboos, I'm 100% against child pornography. So they're not in the same league. Can you talk about child pornography?
I don't. Okay, I don't get your reasoning. Something you don't like. You don't like taboos, but you don't like child pornography, and
But
so
child
it's not the same.
pornography is a crime,
That-
criminal
that's
act.
non
It's actually
sequitur. Complete non sequitur.
but it's your example.
Just to be clear,
No, but you just you didn't prove that it's not a taboo. you just said I don't like the one thing, I don't like the other thing, so they're not the same. That's not a proof at all. Are they?
I have no problems with. I mean, we shouldn't have any taboos. Everything should be able to be discussed.
is there
Yeah.
just is the reason for that is the reason for that because taboos can cause people to react in ways that cause them to develop mental illnesses?
I'm not sure that that's the case, to be honest. Maybe, I don't know. The main reason I'm against taboos is because taboos prevent development.
So, can I make a suggestion?
And
that
degeneration,
a little bit of
maybe. Maybe
I-
they also prevent problems. You
Can
don't know that.
I make a suggestion here? A little bit of the argument seems to be that taboos are entirely vernacular. Things that cannot be discussed. Which is, I mean, there are behavioral taboos. You don't shake hands with your left hand in the Middle East. And to be fair, for some good reason, yet it is taboo, and it is one of those things that you simply do not do. Now, you can talk about that you don't, but the action itself, you simply don't do.
Yeah, but then we're talking about something else. If, for example, we say, okay, you know what, we don't want you to do this action, but we can still talk about it, then we're talking about societal guidelines, but not so much about a taboo.
It's the same thing.
Yeah,
I
it's
mean,
nearly the same thing.
Well, I think what we're talking about is
So
something
maybe it's a bit stronger, you know, taboo. It's really something you don't want to discuss, you know.
with
You're like, you
transgender
don't want to say that you've voted for
Axel,
Trump. That's the taboo.
Axel, give Saint Clair a chance to respond, mate.
I was only saying, with transgender behavior, it seems like you have an example of something that you can do but can't talk about, rather than you can talk about it but you can't do it.
yes.
But
That seems extremely strange.
well,
Well-
it's more of a societal thing. For example, in the Arab world, it's quite uncommon to show someone the soles of your feet. It's considered an insult. Okay. To the Western world people, that doesn't make any sense. But
Doesn't
this. Sorry?
It doesn't make sense to me. I'd like to know how that practice developed over the generations.
I'll not lie to you, I have no clue. Because I simply don't understand it. I know it's the case. So, should we be able to talk about it? Well, maybe we're able to talk about it. But you're not allowed to do it because the act is the offense, not the talking about it. So then the question becomes, are you free to offend someone? And I'll still say, you know what? Yes, because offense is taken anyway, so why bother trying to prevent offending someone if the mere action of trying to prevent to offend someone can be considered an offense?
I think there could be some magical thinking behind this. You know, I'm not advocating for taboos or anything. I just thought that, you know, if you verletzen, was heißt verletzen? If you break a taboo, right? If you break it, then something really bad might happen, like as if by magic, you know. And that's the same with free speech. If you say certain things and suddenly everybody turns into Nazis, and you know, there's all these skeletons coming out. You know, there's some magical kind of properties to it, you know. I think that's interesting.
People throughout history have invoked free speech as if it is a kind of magical spell, and occasionally it does work to change people's opinions.
But I mean the opposite. They forbid speech because they think, oh, it's, you know, the slippery slope. You talk about it, and now next thing you're running around with a swastika. You know, that's just magic.
It works. I guess it works both ways. But it's not magic. It's manipulation. It's chemical manipulation.
Yeah.
Well, it's a belief. It's a belief, though. It's like people. I would say that a lot of people are not even malicious when they think that. They're just like, I don't know, trained to believe that something really bad will happen if they say something freely or think freely.
Maybe we've evolved to think that way, even if it's not necessarily correct.
Yeah, I think there must be some evolutionary reason for it, definitely. That's why I said, like, I thought that taboos have, used to have a societal, like, function, you know, and that's where it comes from. You know, you may say, oh, no, I'm a 100% rational person, and that, we don't need this superstition, you know. It's basically a form of superstition or belief or whatever, you know.
Taboos can have multiple functions. And
Yeah.
one of the functions that taboo often has, especially in smaller societies, is a way to...
Protect?
No, not so much protect as herd behavior. I think herding is not the right word, but I can't find a better word. It's
Community?
Sorry?
Direct.
Community.
Direct. Thank you. Direct is a better word.
Would you guys call breaking the principle of free speech to be a taboo? Would you consider it?
No.
I think it is actually.
It's just a folly.
No,
It's
I
just
think
stupid.
I think it actually is a taboo. How many
I mean,
people? How many people? I think it is. How many people do you actually hear talking about the principle of free speech? When people start talking about free speech,
personally, quite a bit, but
yeah, but that's more because
that's a little bit of selection bias of
Yes.
people that I talk to.
I understood that, and I agree with you. But if we look at what we're seeing, if I look, for example, at my place of work, the amount of things that people don't want to talk about because it makes them feel uncomfortable, therefore they basically don't talk about it.
People at work are usually retarded anyway.
Well, maybe that's not what I'm going to say, but fair enough. But listen,
Well, that's because you still work at work.
but this is what you get. For example, if we look at the global warming thing, do I believe global warming is real at this point in time? Yes, global warming is real. Do I believe global warming is man-made? Well, fuck that. No. Shit, we have very little influence in our planet, even though we like to think we are the biggest influencer on our planet, which basically shows how megalomaniac humankind in general is. But fair enough. But you're not allowed to talk out against it because the science is settled. Well, wait a second. How can the science be settled?
At what precise moment did it become settled?
Well,
What
that's
is the date?
even worse.
When did that meeting occur?
Well, the IPCC has been pushing that narrative since 2010, I think. That's when... No, they've been doing it longer, but I think in 2010, Climate Gate came out.
Yeah, it was somewhere around there.
Yeah. And then it was proven that the IPCC is basically lying to us. And everything that doesn't agree with them, they basically deny. Not on the facts, but on being allowed to be said. Which is weird, but there you have it. That's the world we live in. This is true, for example. Hell, I work in mental health care. And in my line of work, we're not to talk about gender dysphoria as an issue.
Oh my god.
My line of work is the line of work that deals with this issue. But we're not to talk about it. So how can you deal with something if you're not to talk about it?
That's terrible.
I guess you should just match. Sounds like setting people up to fail.
It does.
So you stop people from talking about it to suppress dissent, right? I mean, that's all it comes down to. There is an authority. The authority tells you how to deal with it.
Yeah.
That's the end of it.
Yeah, that's basically it. You cut out someone's tongue, not because you're afraid of what they say, but to prevent them from saying it.
I mean, look, it's much easier to deal with criticism if there is none.
Yeah, that's basically it. That's basically
It's
it.
true. That's very good.
Is there any pattern to the people who decide to become transgender or who develop gender dysphoria?
In all fairness, from what we see at the moment, yes, there is.
Could you lay that out?
The largest group of people with gender dysphoria at this point in time are adolescent autists.
Okay, that makes sense.
It does actually, but people
does.
kind of stop realizing why it makes sense, and we're going to see an increase in non-autist gender dysphoria now that they have decided that it's totally fine to treat adolescent pre-teenagers for gender dysphoria.
Well, there's also an increase in autism, right? I think that
no.
those figures are...
No,
Is it just...
There's an
You
increase
think
in
that's the thing?
there's an increase in awareness.
There's an increase in awareness. There's an increase in recognition.
Really?
Yes, really.
Autism is something that has existed since ancient times.
Yep.
Well,
Not on that grand scale, though.
Yes.
I don't know.
Well,
Really?
so look, hold on. There's a few things going on here. One, if you were diagnosed with autism in 1981, you were diagnosed with a very small portion of what we diagnose as autism today. And so there are more things that are generally referred to as autism right
No,
now.
no.
There's a series of similar neurological disorders. Yes.
Yes. The
Sure,
the
but
thing is,
those-
we have a better recognition of what autism is.
Sure.
Basically,
and
that's
the
the
flip
reason.
side of this is that things that were diagnosed as other things in 1981 are now diagnosed as autism. And so,
Yeah.
yes, there is an increase in the diagnosis of autism. There is not an increase in the diagnosis of what we have always called these. So if you were to lump
So it's
all
like
the-
rape, basically.
Yeah, right. So if you were to lump all the things that became autism into autism and calc it over time, the same number, the same percentage of the population basically is diagnosed with autism without very much change. But since we have been grouping things into the term autism, now it seems like there's this giant explosion of autism if you don't know what happened in the past.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, and I mean, I've worked with autism for the last 20 years. I mean, I have mentioned it once or twice. Before that, I've worked in youth work as well. And a lot of kids that were in the care of youth workers for behavioral problems, I'm 100% sure that half of them, at least, would have now been diagnosed with autism instead of behavioral problems. Merely because now we recognize better what's going on. Do I think autism is a growing diagnosis? Yes, I do. Do I think that's because there is more autism now than there ever was? No, I don't. We recognize it better.
That's fair enough.
Autism in itself can be a problem, just like everything else can be a problem. It doesn't have to be a problem. But the one thing autism is, and this is something people really need to understand, and this is why gender dysphoria and autism is so dangerous, is it's a development disorder. So, as humans, we go through several development phases. And the first development phase is, who am I? Now, this starts roughly around 2-3 years old. And it continues into your rest of your life, basically. Well, it does. I mean, people will tell you...
It does. No, it's just a funny way to put it.
It's only for a few years. No, it's not, because every new situation in your life will challenge you on who you are. And there are several why phases in your life. Now, the first one is in around the second, third age of life, a year of life. Emotionally, people with autism develop slower than people without autism. The average age of kids I work with is between 12 and 21. The average emotional age of the kids I work with is between 2 and 3.
Wow. Even the 21-year-olds.
Even a 21-year-old. And they are vocally just as capable as anyone else. They might be they might be intellectual capable as a 21 years old in a lot of things, but emotionally they are not. And part of this causes the problem that as a person they have problems developing. In comes gender dysphoria. And gender dysphoria basically tells you, well, all the problems you have because you don't recognize who you are, you're in the wrong body. This is partly true. People with autism indeed often have a problem identifying who they are, and this causes problems. This doesn't mean they're in the wrong body, it merely means they don't know who they are. So it starts with, who am I? Now, this is...
Who knows?
This is one of the reasons. And this is something why I'm against taboos. Because what is a taboo? A taboo is basically the first thing to stop you from asking why. But to realize who you are, what your position is, you have to be able to ask why. You constantly have to be able to ask why. freedom of speech is important. Why? Because you have to ask why, even in the most unfavorable circumstances.
Like a scientist.
And that answer should never be, because I say so, so now shut the fuck up.
The scientist settles.
This is what adults do when they can't answer their child. And it's a failure of the adult and not of the child. We should always be able to ask why. And we should always demand an answer, even if we don't like the answer. Because without that, there is no growth. And without that, things like gender dysphoria are on the rise.
And it doesn't matter what the level of technological development your civilization is at. This has happened before.
Yes, this is not based on technical. This is pure societal. And this is why I think freedom of speech is not something that our governments should protect. It's something that we should protect.
Well, look, there is a simple reality that governments don't protect anything. And I don't carry that as far as you want. The simple fact of the matter is, if your population thinks that the neighboring country should invade you at 100% of populace level, then the neighboring country comes over and invades, right? That's just what happens, and no one stops them. So the government isn't like...
Hell, that's even better than a claim.
Even better than what?
That's even better than a genuine claim.
Yeah. So, well, maybe. But look, this premise that the government is going to protect you from all the things, or anything really, it's not going to do anything that the populace really doesn't want, and it never can, and it never will. And this is why this week somebody published a study saying 60% of millennials don't like the First Amendment and think that it should ban hate speech. I mean, if that's true, then we're talking, and assuming the belief holds, in about 20 years, the First Amendment is gone, right? The government is not going to fight the populace to keep it.
Yeah.
It's terrible enough that they know a term like hate speech. It's such a terrible term.
But that's the danger we are facing in our society right now. There are people who actually think hate speech actually means something. And therefore you should be allowed to be told not to say something because it's considered hate speech. Okay, that's nice. Who considers what's hate speech? Well, the person who hears it. Well, that's not true. It's not based on who hears it, because if we look at Count Dankula, he got convicted based on what a judge thought his message was.
And there is your answer. That's who determines what hate speech is: the government.
Yeah, and then we have a problem. But at this point in time, everyone seems to define what hate speech is.
I don't think it's the government. I think it's the press and then the government, but it's the press first. they cement it and
I
they
think so too.
repeat it and
Well,
repeat it and
politics-
repeat it until some
Politics
idiot
is-
politician
politics
takes it up.
Politics is downstream from culture.
Yeah.
So we live in a culture that thinks it's completely acceptable to silence people.
So, not to get into my own ridiculous personal things too much, but I am not entirely sure that politics is downstream from culture. I will stand athwart history and say that Breitbart was wrong. But for the sake of the moment, even then, the press don't define it, right? The press can do whatever they want, and
No,
if
the press
anything
is-
in this world that has taught me that the press is not anywhere near as good at this as they think they are. AB 5, the destroy the gig economy in California, that suddenly started getting a bunch of traction as soon as it hit journalists, but prior to that, it was fine. The government is still doing the defining. The press will stand around championing to destroy everyone around them, and the
Well-
moment that they have a problem, they get upset.
And
But it's
that's a
not like
funny
they
thing.
overturned AB 5.
That's a funny thing, though. Is it the government who defines? Because let's be honest,
Yeah.
at this point in time in the USA, the government is Trump.
Well, no. I mean, the government is a lot of things, and
Well, true,
Trump
but
is some portion of it.
fair enough, fair enough. Trump is a portion of it. But Trump doesn't get a right to say certain things. They will still attack him over it. So
Well,
it's
that doesn't mean he doesn't have a right to say it, right?
But-
There's no imbuement
define-
of freedom of speech to say that you can't call me a moron for saying whatever I think, right?
fair enough. But it seems more that it's a certain political alignment that is pushing the idea of hate speech.
Sure, I'm not saying they're good faith actors here, but they are allowed to criticize Trump as much as he is about.
Sure.
Is fair to call them fake news and Rosie O'Donnell a fat pig. So
100% agree with you on that one. But it seems to be coming more from one side of the political spectrum than from the other side.
sure, and look, I am strongly of the opinion that the modern day progressives are what's left over of the original progressives, and they are pushing further. And if you go read about original progressives, you find very unkind, unhappy things like Stalin was kind of progressive, Hitler was kind of progressive. I mean, like, it's not to immediately over the top it with that nonsense, I guess. But the reality of the situation is this was always the plan. I don't know how else to say it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they've been pushing for so many of these things for 100 years.
More.
I am progressively less surprised the more that it goes on. 100 years was not an exact date by any stretch of the imagination. Just a reference that it's been going on a while.
In all fairness, I think it started somewhere in the 19th century, 1830, 1840, I think something like that, in France, and it's been going on ever since.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a totally unfair claim. I mean, I would suggest that even if it's not the progressivism we know today, it was definitely the parent of,
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, and this is something that Toxic made aware in one of her older videos. A lot of the sexual depravity we're seeing also came from old philosophers, and a lot of them are based on French.
The old man.
Well, yeah, but they're based on French schools of thought, and there's something seriously
Perverted. The French are perverts anyway. They eat frogs.
well. I would say
And snails.
I wouldn't say it's the French. I would say the elite are perverted, and whether they're
Alright.
French elite or English elite, the elite are perverted. And there's something.
Often seems to be true.
And there's something difficult because if we look at, and I said this back in the day, Marxism to me was based on trying to create a new elite class, and this is what we're still seeing. I mean,
So-
An elite class based on what?
sorry,
An elite class based on what?
oppression.
Politics.
Yeah. I kind of. I mean, a lot of that didn't come along till after Marx, but I mean, it is an obvious consequence of the things that he wrote, though it's easy to say that in retrospect.
You just need to have a great amount of moral superiority.
I'm not
Yes.
saying I'm not saying Marx himself was in favor. Hell, Marx actually spoke out against Marxism during his life.
I don't know. That's sort of in contention as far as I can tell.
No. He was really clear about it. He really didn't like what people made of his work because he really disagreed with what Marxism, even at that time, became. Because that's not what he meant, even though
Developed
it
a
was.
thought that kind of got out of his hands even before he died.
Yeah, indeed. And he recognized it. So this is the one fun thing about people who call themselves Marxist. they name themselves
Marx.
after. Well, actually, they do because Marxism was
You have
very
something
much.
similar- you have something similar to Plato.
Yeah,
As soon as he died, his students immediately began disagreeing with one another and writing texts to try and one up one another.
yeah, and at the same time destroying what the original idea was supposed to be.
Exactly.
And this is what happened with Marx. Hell, Marx was very much against compelled anything. And every Marxist system since is based on the compulsion of people for doing what they don't want.
Herein you get the ridiculousness of anarcho-communism, which is to say that somehow everybody is suddenly going to agree that this is a good idea, even though nobody ever has. And then right after they agree that it's a good idea, we're all suddenly going to drop into the communist utopia. And what implementation has always found is that turns out not everybody agrees.
Well,
you end up with the history of Marxism.
It's literally anarcho-communism is literally a contradictor in terma, contradictor in terminus. It's literally impossible because anarchy means the individual is the one who decides. And communism means we have to do for the group what the group needs.
All right, that's why it requires the group buy-in, right? So Marx was of the opinion in a couple of his writings that anarcho-communism would just at some point everybody would just agree, and that they might need this. They were going to need this socialism thing to show them what it was all about. But after they got it, everybody was going to decide that it was cool to work 14 hours a day and never get anything for it, or whatever other ridiculous. I mean, to be fair, according to anarcho-communism, apparently there are going to be unicorns that just crap whatever you want, and then you just go get it.
Apparently, hey, had a diet that was a bit too high in psychoactives.
But let's be honest, if we're talking about anarcho-communism or indeed groups like Antifa, which consider themselves anarcho-communist, which is amazing to me, the one thing anarchism was always predicated on was the no harm principle.
Non-aggression.
Non-aggression. Well, more than non-aggression. It's you don't do anything that might harm someone who does not deserve harm.
Yeah, no, it's the name is the non-aggression principle.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah.
Okay, but
the official name.
So how can you get around that one by claiming, well, but in this case you deserve harm? Badum.
Well, so again, they're look.
How do you
define harm?
How do you determine whether another person deserves harm?
Well, he disagrees, therefore he must be bad. Hell, everyone who doesn't agree with everyone who doesn't agree with Antifa is automatically a fascist.
Yeah.
Funny enough, that's a particularly fascist statement, but you don't agree with me, you're wrong. That's what Mussolini said.
Always projects, right? So that's how that works.
You gotta understand with these people. It's not about what ideas mean. Everything is defined by opposition, and I mean everything is defined by opposition, and they are on the correct side of all decisions. So if you oppose them, then you must be the Hitler fascist to the otherwise would have been a great guy Stalin's communism. And Stalin didn't do nothing. The Kulaks just accidentally died. That's the story, and we're sticking with it. And so anything in opposition of this utopian nonsense is bad. Anything on this side that is opposing all of the disagreeing views is good. The bad side in the dichotomy in history was communism and fascism. Therefore, if you agree with us, you are a communist. If you disagree, you are a fascist.
Yeah, which basically is
ridiculous.
Well, it's even worse. People always like to think about these are two different sides of the same coin, and I'm going to say no. You know what? Fascism and communism isn't even a different side of the same coin. It's the fucking same side of the coin. Fascism and communism are comparable. Incredibly comparable.
Can you distinguish the two?
Yeah, sure.
I'm asking Mudwayne if he can.
I figured that's why I didn't answer.
Can I distinguish the difference between fascism and communism?
Yes, sir.
If I'm really honest, not really. Fascism is based on people working together for the better good of society, and communism is people working together for the betterment of society. The difference between fascism and communism is that in fascism you were still allowed certain aspects of private property, where in communism that really wasn't supposed to be.
That's not a particularly accurate assessment of fascism, but I mean,
Could you give us your assessment, Don?
yeah, sure. So, fascism is a break-off from the socialist experiment, where they move to national socialism, one might say, and so they equally decided that the general methods of socialism, which was going to get them to communism one day, they were all sure were bad, right? You couldn't just put all of this control in the power of the state, and so the state was going to give rules, not directives of what to do, just rules about what everyone had to do at all times. And in communism, idealistically speaking, again, not so much an implementation, because implementation, they tend to work out pretty close to the same. But in communism, nobody owns anything of any variety, not even to the point where somebody else just tells you what to do with it. You don't own anything. And equally speaking, again, the premise is there shall be no government, therefore no one to hand down the dictates of what you can do. And look, there are a million other minutia-based differences, but in like big, broad strokes, those are the big ones. Oh, and communism was global. That, the revolution took over the whole world. Sorry, forgot about that.
Well, it was supposed to be global. It's one of the first globalist movements of our modern era. And the funny thing is, the United Nations, very strong communist influences in there. Europe, very strong communist influences in there. And who are the ones that they are railing out against the most? People who aren't in favor of globalism.
Yeah. Well, so one of those things that kills me is that in 53, Eisenhower was president, and he was talking about what we now all talk about, the war, the military-industrial complex, and all this sort of thing. But at the same time, right before Eisenhower, in fact, right as he was probably getting out of World War II, as he invariably was, everybody got together and formed the UN, and the only thing that they agreed on is that socialism was a good idea.
Yeah, funny enough. Makes you wonder how.
All of them?
Yes, every single entry into the UN, every single country that is in the initial UN roster showed up and said, socialism is a good idea, but we should make sure that none of that ever happens again.
Yep. But, I mean, this is another great example. I mean, let's look at the United Nations and compare it to what do we think free speech is. Look at the member states of the United Nations in the Human Rights Council.
Oh, Jesus.
I mean, there are a few countries in there that aren't outright despicable. But most of them are the ones that should be locked away in a cell and throw away the key, sort of societies. And it's not the society itself, but the governments that are apt. I mean, come on. Saudi Arabia being one of the stable members of the Human Rights Council of the United Nations.
They still ahead?
And there were the women's, when they the women's rights leaders as well. Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, they were.
Aren't there 23 members of the Human Rights Council? The UN Human Rights Council?
Sorry, what did you say?
Are there 23 members of the UN Human Rights Council?
I think so.
I think that would be more like a checks and balances thing, Saudi Arabia could be happy just saying, like, hey, I think women should be treated like garbage or whatever.
Well,
and everybody else would be like, fuck you, Saudi Arabia, we're not doing that shit.
Yeah, but Saudi
Well,
Arabia
they're
has the
fucking
one
say.
who has the right to say that. So, let me see if I can see. The Human Rights Council is an intergovernmental body within the United Nations, made up of 47 states at the moment.
47, my bad.
Yes. Well,
Whoa.
I thought you were right too, mate.
Yeah, so did I.
But it's a little bit more. And yeah, it's just a number.
Even more so. Like, the hell is Saudi Arabia going to do?
Yeah, I'm trying to find out.
They could assassinate me, but I'm just one dude,
Yeah.
Like,
It-
you have
it's
46 other member states against you.
Yeah, but are they? Because here's some of their sweet, sweet friends: Somalia,
Yes.
Nigeria,
Yep.
Qatar,
Yep.
Pakistan.
Yep. Oh man, the Human Rights Council. Oh no. Yeah, that's one to take serious.
Pakistan?
Yep.
Venezuela.
Who
Yep.
did they get to show up for fucking Pakistan? The place doesn't. The tribes within Pakistan don't even recognize Pakistan. Like,
Yep.
like who the fuck is Pakistan? We live in Jalalabad, you know. Fuck.
We've had the same way of life for thousands of years. We don't want to be part of the whatever it is you're doing.
Yeah.
But
Namibia, the Sudan, Libya, where there's open slave trades.
Yep. Yep. And these are the countries that are telling the rest of the world. I mean, let's be honest. Currently, there are 2 West European countries. There are 2 East European countries. There are 2 Latin American countries. And there are 13 Pacific. No, that's not true.
Asia Pacific. So
Yeah.
there's 6 Eastern European,
6 European, 7 European.
7 Western European. Latin America has 8, and 13 African states.
Yeah. And then if we look at the Western countries, Germany, the Netherlands, Austria, Denmark, Italy, Australia, and Spain. And Germany is socialistic, whether we like it or not. They are pushing. I mean, the hell. It's been often said that Angela Merkel used to be part of the DDR's secret service, which could be correct, but it's been said so often. And the fact that she, even after she won the election, she had people celebrating on stage with her and took away the German flag.
Oh yeah.
I'm sorry.
Cringe.
You're the chancellor of a country and you're against your flag. What does that signify? What does that signify?
A lot of self-hate.
A lot of
Shame.
self-hate. A lot of self-hate. Now the Netherlands. I'm sorry. I live in the Netherlands, but we have at this point in time we have part of our current government is a party that was very much in favor of getting the referendum as part of the Dutch system. They finally got it. It didn't go the way they wanted it, and they have now effectively destroyed it.
Grabbed it.
The very same party that was founded based on the necessity of a referendum is the party that said, okay, you know what? We don't want a referendum in this country because people don't vote the way we think they should. Now, I'm sorry, but if that's not socialism, communism, it's one thing very clearly not, and that's democracy. That's the Dutch government at the moment. We claim to be a democracy, but in reality... Now, the other countries speak for themselves. I mean, at this point in time, I think the most freedom-loving countries in the list of the United Nations Human Rights Council are old Eastern European countries. And
South Korea.
that's about it. South Korea and the old East European countries. And why do I say the old East European countries? Because they still remember what it means to live under communism.
Yeah.
Romania.
At this point in time,
V.
Poland is a freer country than the Netherlands. Oh well, the Netherlands is a wealthier country, I'll grant you that. And there is plenty of things wrong in Poland, don't get me wrong. I mean, there's plenty of stuff that needs to be done there. But there you're at least, for some measurement, allowed to criticize your own government. In most of the Western world, you're not. Or you're allowed to criticize them, but that automatically means you're person non grata.
To some degree, is there I mean, is there some possible way around that?
Well, I think we should stop waiting for our governments to do this. I think freedom of speech shouldn't be something our governments protect for us. It's something we should demand as a society.
Well, hold on a minute. Is there any way in which you could possibly make it so that there are not social consequences for openly advocating unpopular things?
I think you should be able
give
to...
give licenses to everybody to be allowed to be stand-up comedians for 200 days a year. How's that?
So that doesn't. I mean, look.
You can always say, "Oh no, I wasn't serious. It was only a joke."
Well,
But,
you
listen,
could, but here's the shtick, right? Well, one, so you shouldn't need a license to be a stand-up comic. That unto itself, terrible thing. On the other hand, though, look, is there a time in which the Black Israelites are going to be popular amongst a group of non-Black supremacists? There's no way this happens. For reference, if anybody doesn't know who the Black Israelites are, which, come to think of it, they probably don't, but I was trying not to say Nazis, so,
they are. They're black Nazis. They are.
Black Israelites, are those the guys who were shouting at the Covington kids?
Yeah.
Yes, they are.
Those ones?
Yeah, those are the ones. Black Israelites are the ones that... I mean, it's a black...
Retards.
It's a black supremacy movement that's even so stupid that... America has seen several black supremacy movements. I think Malcolm X was the main one. Well, not
He was the big one for a long time, yeah.
And they tried to work together with other ones, and none of them wanted to work together with the Black Israelites.
Yeah, no, they're crazy
wasn't
people
King.
would be generous.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there is no. Look, if I run a business, I definitely don't want to hire these people, right? Not even just because I find them distasteful, but look, if you're manning a cash register for me and every single white customer that comes in, you go, the black supremacy world nation state is going to kill all of you crackers. I'm probably not getting a lot of business, right?
Well, listen, this is what socialism has brought the world. It's kind of funny, but socialism has turned out to be the biggest anti-white movement there is.
No, yeah, but that doesn't change the question, though, right? There is not going to be a time where they are going to reasonably be able to say whatever ridiculous thing they want without consequence, right? Again, I don't know about you, but I'm not hiring them, right?
Yeah.
So, and I understand that this is basically what we're getting after here is that, like, look, Richard Spencer is never getting a job again other than being Richard Spencer. And is there even a way to change that? And I'm pretty sure the answer is no.
I think there should be, though. I mean,
like,
listen,
what, though?
I don't care that you're a white or black supremacist. If your job is fixing my car and you fix my car, who am I to complain about your political stance?
So this is why the Black Israelites are more relevant than Richard Spencer, because Richard Spencer is a crazy person unto himself for a lot of reasons. But it is physically possible that he could stand somewhere and do something without talking about white supremacy. The Black Israelites, I'm pretty sure, could not.
Anyway, sorry guys, I need
They
a
don't have
fast.
very much content beyond their style.
I'm sorry, I need a fast bio break. I'll be right back, but you continue for a moment, please.
Sure.
You could work as a DJ anyway.
I'm sorry, St. Clair. I missed whatever that was.
What I said was they don't have very much content behind their style.
No, not really. But I mean, being as that's the case, look. Do I really care if you are, back to the if I'm hiring you discussion? Do I really care if you're a Black Israelite who just shuts their mouth and does their job? Probably not. But if
Don't talk to the customers.
or even if you do talk to the customers, just kind of forego the general Black Israelite nonsense for a little bit, and we'll all be okay. But
All right, leave your faith in politics at home when you come to work.
I mean, seems relevant, right? But if you can't do that, and for that matter, even if you can, and you are, for example, Richard Spencer, at this point, you've been plastered all over the country well enough that if I hire you to, again, stand behind a cash register or any other public facing thing, the chance that I get any black, Latino, Asian, whatever, non-white customer effectively goes down to zero. Right? I'm like, and the way around that, whether we want to admit it or not, sort of comes down to thought control, right? You need to police the thoughts of the entire nation, I guess, to believe that it's okay that Richard Spencer advocates for you to be, killed and, I don't know, moved out of the country or whatever it is that you think that he advocates. I'm not suggesting that Richard Spencer advocates for people to die, but you have to police their thoughts on the subject so that they are willing to ignore that insofar as they will get a service from him. And I don't know that that's any better than the inverse thought policing.
Yeah, I think we should stay away from thought policing altogether, to be honest. I mean, listen, the worst thing that can happen is that you and I both have a vastly different opinion about something. Okay. As soon as we live in a society where that's no longer allowed, we are thought policing.
Well, so, I mean, that's sort of where I'm at here, right? So let's, for example, say that for whatever reason, the two of us, Maud Wayne and I, hate each other eternally. And I know Maud Wayne, I don't know, where it's a literal to the death battle or something, right? And I know Maud Wayne works at Bob's shop on the corner. Is there anything in this world that's going to make me patronize Bob's shop on the corner?
Most likely not. No, and funny enough, I don't.
Depends on the job.
Funny enough, I don't really. You know what? I mean, you can vote with your wallet. I don't think anyone is, or any job or any company is irreplaceable. So that's not something I'm worried about. But
well, so therein is the problem, right? So if Walmart hires Richard Spencer tomorrow, they're going to have kind of a problem, right?
Well,
it doesn't even matter what they hire him to do.
There will be people who will make it a problem, and therein lies the problem. I mean, this is funny enough. If you can remember back in the day, the feminists started a hate campaign against Thunderfoot and trying to get him fired because he was a Nazi.
Yeah.
At the time, he worked in Czechoslovakia. It wasn't Czechoslovakia. It was Czechia. And they are quite, just like most of Europe, we're quite aware of our history when it comes to the Nazis. So, as soon as you're called an ist or an ob, people have a problem. So, therein lies a big risk. By the toxic and by the anxious, by the way. Sorry, I didn't see people leave. We should, as a society, try to prevent glorifying this behavior. I mean, I can understand that if you listen, I have a problem with one of the electricity companies in this country, the electricity providers. They shafted me. So if anyone is to ask me, do I think they're a good company? I said if they were the last one, maybe, but they're not, so no.
It's your right as customer, right? Or consumer.
Yes, it's your right as your customer to say, I don't want to go back to them. But should I then continuously badmouth these people? Well, no. It's my humble opinion, and I may have every right to my opinion, but it should not be used as a club to beat down that company.
Well, so can I presume this was shafting you in some relatively small financial way? Like they didn't repossess your house or anything, probably.
Well, they did shaft me financially. That's true.
Okay, so What if they burned down your house and killed your kid?
Then I still wouldn't tell you not to go to them. I would have killed them, but that's me.
So one of those is going to be a legal recourse, and one of them isn't, right? So,
Yeah.
And look, let's say they maliciously burnt down your house and killed your kid, and for whatever reason, mostly the cops shooting you, you're not going and killing them. Is there some reason that you shouldn't be running around telling people, like, look, they came over, pulled the wires out of the wall, pushed them into the carpet until it lit on fire,
by all means,
and then locked the doors?
If they actually did something like that, yeah, by all means, go share the story.
In which case, all we're arguing is what level of offense promotes.
No. We're no longer talking about a level of offense. We're talking about a criminal act.
I don't mean in being offended. What level of wrong they have committed?
Well, we're talking about a criminal act.
Well,
no, in personal liability is a civil matter. It's a tort. What you're talking about, libel or slander, is a tort. It's a civil matter.
Yeah, but the example given now was someone speaking out against them after they committed a criminal act.
well, so remove it from being. Is that the line? As long as we have written a law that says it's wrong, because all that's going to promote is exactly what we have right now in Massachusetts, which is writing laws saying that you can't call someone a bitch.
Yeah, but then we're talking about you're not allowed to use certain words.
Yeah,
Unless they're a bit.
Which is funny enough against the First Amendment.
Yes, no, absolutely. I fail to see how it will survive in court. On the other hand, my point here is that if you're going to draw the line of open advocacy after some wrongdoing at it being a legal line, all that will incentivize is moving the legal line, right?
Yeah, but the good thing about America, which is slightly off topic here, but let me try this one. The good thing about America is that America's government, the First Amendment, basically said we're not allowed to do this. Now, in Europe, we have no such protection.
Right. Well, and that sort of demonstrates the point, right?
Yeah.
So back to if we actually have 80% of the country or something that thinks that we need to get rid of the First Amendment, it's gone, right? The First Amendment is not written in stone. It can go away.
Well, there's rather a large movement at this moment in America that's against the First Amendment, funny enough.
Yes, exactly.
They can only be against the First Amendment because the First Amendment is there, which is the irony of things, but okay.
It's never lost on me. But I mean, being as that's the case, right? What are they doing? They're moving the legal limit, right? They don't.
You
know, the law determines morality.
Are as well.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Say again.
What do you think their intentions are?
With removing the First Amendment?
Thought control.
Yeah. What
are the intentions of the people who are actually doing the demonstrating? Do they know what they're doing?
So
No, that's stupid.
Yeah, I mean, look, most of these people grew up in a world where you didn't call fat people fat because it was mean. And so they just decided that that was a morally good thing, right? Because you might make them feel bad. And then they didn't grow up and be adults and go, oh, okay, fat people are fat and that's just the way it is. You don't want to get called fat, don't be fat. And so they ran into a lot of the rest of the world that doesn't care about any of this, right? And that's why you see these movements in cities, because cities did big pushes for this. And rural America went, if you don't want to be fat, then go work on the farm next door and you won't be fat. You know?
Yeah, well, but try to do something.
Yeah. And
I think most people don't understand principles, right? That's one problem. People just are not taught principles.
Well, that's because, listen, there's an old joke in the Netherlands, and it came from the 70s, so it's really old. And it basically boils down to, in English, the translation may not be as good, but it's not that bad either. It basically boils down to this. This is where I draw the line. These are my principles. And if you disagree, I will get new principles.
Yeah, basically.
So true.
But to the question of are your demonstrators being malicious? No, they think they're being nice, right?
Well, but they are malicious because they're actually attacking people.
Hmm.
I mean, let's be honest.
It's
I
as if
actually think
it's as if they believe this is the most morally upright thing they've ever had the opportunity to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think they actually believe that they are principled, and they're not, because they don't really know what that is. You see, they don't really think through. They think it's a principle to be against white people because whatever, and then they don't think one step further because they don't think about the
They're told.
principle behind it. You see.
Well, so if you want to understand their principles, think about how you would explain being nice to a 2-year-old. And I promise you, their principles will come into very clear view.
It's
right?
almost
Not very
it's
deep.
almost as if it's not a level of principle at all. They struggle with simple virtues.
Yeah. And yet, if you were explaining being nice to a 2-year-old, it would be don't say mean things to people. You shouldn't show up other people that you're playing games with, right? So if you win a game, you shouldn't stand on the board and be like, yeah, and I don't know,
Yeah.
or something, right?
We
You
try to
shouldn't
teach
do
our
that.
teach our kids to be good winners and good losers.
Exactly. And this is the principle that they're going on.
It's an understanding of morality that's useful for only a tiny world.
Yeah. I mean, by the time you're 5, morality is more complicated than that. But I'm telling you, if you want to understand what they're talking about as a principle, that's it.
2-year-olds.
Yes. I mean, it's almost physically painful to think of an adult living that way, but I promise you that's what they're doing.
Yep.
They don't seem to be equipped to even live as adults. I mean, if you have the opportunity and the time to be demonstrating, is somebody taking care of you? I mean, is that why you have the freedom to do this? I mean,
Well, I mean,
How
look
much-
at average move-out ages, and that guy in New York that his parents had to file eviction papers when he was like what 31. Yeah, they got time.
Mm-hmm. And there's something seriously wrong with our society. Now, there's plenty of reasons why this is happening, or at least there's plenty of things we can point at why this is happening. Funny enough, one of the first things people tend to point at is, for example, the higher rate of immigrants or the acceptance of gay marriage. And I think these things are at best secondary.
The self-esteem movement did way more than either of those things. I mean, look,
Yeah.
I criticize the gay marriage thing plenty, but the self-esteem movement was a big deal.
What's the self-esteem movement?
So
First of all-
back in the late 80s to
every
mid
child is
90s.
special.
Yeah, exactly, right. So you don't be harsh in correcting children. This is where the outputs of this now are everybody gets a trophy, but everyone's
It's an
a
American
little
thing, though, isn't it?
thing.
Never heard
well,
of that.
So it has different names in different countries, but the premises were all the same. In Europe, you got a lot of, everyone has something to contribute. Everyone has something important to say. And look, these things were in America too, but they were this big package of ideas that got real popular basically across the Western world in the late 80s to mid 90s.
It's almost as if the belief is that our genes naturally predispose us to become a certain caste. I mean,
Well, the
something.
thing.
It's as if they believe that there are specific roles in reality that need to be filled by people.
The thing is, I'm not even sure if it's a genetical thing. It may be, and even working in healthcare for as long as I did, I still don't think genetics is that big a marker in the development. I mean, unless of course you come down with a malfunction in your body, that's a different story altogether. But on average, I don't think genetics is that big a deal. But it's because people like to claim, yeah, how do I say this? Basically, it's what's been said a moment ago. Yeah, we've created a society where, well, everything is good, everything is equal, and criticizing of anything therefore means you must be a bad person. Not the person you're criticizing is bad, but you are, because don't you see that whatever they're doing is good too?
Moral relativism.
Moral relativism.
I really hate to check out on the term moral relativism, but I actually have to go. I love this topic.
Well, you're more than welcome to come back, and I'll send you a new invite in due time.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me, guys. If I can make it back, I definitely will.
Well, I don't think we're going to go on much longer, to be honest. We're 10 minutes away from the 2-hour marker, and I usually
That
try
sounds
to.
right.
I usually try
All
to
right,
end
guys.
there. See you later.
Again
Thanks for
having
joining
me.
us.
I am certain I'll be back.
Great to have you, mate. See you next time.
It's really great talking to you. I think that you are incredibly intelligent.
Thank you.
Well, he did leave California, so
Low bar.
Good, very good sign.
that's a good sign, mate. It's a good sign.
Absolutely.
There are still people who think California is the way to go. Instead of
The way to go- It's definitely the way to go mad.
yeah, that's. That was not too long ago. Someone said, "Yeah, but we're the seventh biggest economy in the world," and I'm like, "Yeah, mate, but you used to be the fifth."
You
So-
just have to be one of the rich people, and I'd say you can probably.
When was it the 5th?
I think after Reagan.
Take it.
So in the 90s?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
Then again, Venezuela was the third economy in the world, I think.
I'm almost certain that has something to do with drugs.
Maybe, I think.
Drugs coming from South America and being shipped to California. It was oil.
Nah, I don't think drugs is the main thing. I really think
Oil.
socialism is the bigger.
Oil.
Sorry?
My husband says it's actually oil.
Yeah, that's
Well,
what I
no,
would.
oil was
thought.
why Venezuela was so rich.
Yeah.
But they still have oil, so.
What made Venezuela temporarily rich?
No, they weren't temporarily rich. But oil was the reason that Venezuela was rich. Venezuela has, I think, the second highest deposit of oil in the ground that we know of in any country in the world. I think only Saudi Arabia has more.
What a waste.
But then suddenly someone thought socialism is a good idea, and the country collapsed.
It's going to stop things for a while.
Well,
I feel like this. I feel like the kind of socialism that exists in Venezuela is temporary, and it really seems to be stalling the country's ability to be productive. Like
Well,
it doesn't seem like it doesn't seem permanent, is what I'm saying. It seems like a stall.
I'm hopeful it's not permanent. Theoretically speaking, it shouldn't be permanent, but under socialism, it can't fix itself. It simply can't. There's no way, because socialism won't allow it to happen.
Tell me what you mean by that.
Okay, everyone talks about Scandinavian countries as being a great example of socialism, right? I don't know why, but I can understand why. Because back in the 70s...
I don't think there is a terrific example of socialism anywhere.
Well, that's the point, because socialism never worked. Now, Denmark, Sweden, and Norway did have lots of social programs. They still do, but there's a difference between social and socialistic. This is something a lot of people have a problem understanding. The Sweden and Denmark system drastically changed because their production system was definitely based on socialism, and they went back to a free market system when it came to their company structures. And that made these countries, the Scandinavian countries, so incredibly successful. That and the fact that they're pretty homogenous, but that's a different story altogether. But now, there are still politicians in America that pretend that the Scandinavian countries are an example of positive socialism. Whereas they're absolutely a great example on how socialism will always fail. Because these countries were pretty developed, went to socialism, and were on the brink of destruction, and at that brink turned around and went back to capitalism, which saved them, which made them successful. But they do have a lot of social programs, which are being paid for by taxes, which you can be in favor or against, but that's a completely different story. Does that make sense?
I think so.
So can Venezuela return as one of the wealthiest countries in the world? Yes, they can, but not under socialism.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. Do you think that they will need to? I don't know. What do you think the solution is? Will the fix need to be internal, or will it need to be done by somebody else?
No, the fix needs to be internal. The fix needs to be internal.
What's your opinion on China? I know it's partly capitalist, right?
It's not
But
capitalist
is
at all.
it? Huh?
It's not capitalist at all.
Yeah, well, it has. I don't know. It has all these grassroots like cottage industries.
The state acts as one enormous money-making company.
And there is no company in China that isn't partly owned by the Chinese government.
Mm-hmm.
It's like an enormous, elaborate root system.
So it's not communism. I mean, I'd say if it was communism, what will it be replaced with? That's the question.
It's
The interesting question.
I think China is a good example of state-owned capitalism
Uh-huh.
with very
Yeah,
strong communistic, socialistic tendencies.
I think that's fair.
It's not capitalism, but it allows a limited form of capitalism, but only in as far as they allow it. So they're close to.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I think they replaced it with fascism. Really, I mean, organ harvesting and shit like that. Complete.
Yeah, but this is something.
Complete surveillance.
This is something you
social
saw-
point. It's very fascist to me.
These are
No,
things you
it's-
saw. These are things you saw in communism too.
Yeah, I guess. But they're just the totalitarian aspects of communism, right?
That's the thing.
The-
And do I think Venezuela can return to a better time? Yeah, sure. But it has to come from within. Look at Poland and how Poland broke away from communism, and they're still not there. They're still struggling every day.
What kind of internal fix does it need to be? Does it need to be a revolution? Does it need to be?
Yes,
You think it needs to be an internal revolution?
yes, it has to be.
Based-
I'm not
based
saying it has to
around-
be.
Based around what? Capitalism and liberal free speech, something like that.
Well, you don't know, right? When you start a revolution, you don't know what you're gonna end up with. You never know.
You never know. That's true.
Are you asking for something like the American Revolution, only in Venezuela?
Not every revolution is the American Revolution, mate.
What's gonna happen?
All right, but I'm looking for a comparison.
I don't think you can find a comparison.
Okay.
I don't think you can predict it either. You see,
No, that's
the
the
problem.
You need people standing up for a different socio-economic system. Is capitalism a good one? Yes, it's the best one we have. Is it perfect? No. So maybe they bring up something that's better. It's possible. I'm not going to say it's not.
What is your opinion on distributism?
It won't work
Okay.
because it's still based in some way on a planned economy. And the
And
problem
an economy is unplannable.
this is why the Austrian school of thought in
At its
economy
core, yeah, I think.
is more effective than the Keynesian school of thought in economy. Because the Keynesian school of thought preaches predictability. Whereas the Austrian school of thought says there's too much nuance in everything, so there's very little we can predict. We can give raw estimates at best. And funny enough, this is why the Austrian economic school has been more capable of giving predictions that actually worked than the Keynesian one. Yet economically speaking, the whole world is on Keynesian economics. So we're not really in a free market capitalist system anywhere in the world at this point in time. I'm not saying that the Austrian economic system would have been that, but the Keynesian kind of forces people to think in a certain way, and
I would argue that that kind of capitalist economic system has never existed anywhere.
probably not.
Just as the ideal form of socialism has never truly existed anywhere.
Well, but the reason why the ideal form of socialism has never existed is because it's inherently contradictory. The ideal form of capitalism has never existed because the downside of that existing is that it creates the possibilities of monopolies, and as soon as you have a monopoly, you don't have capitalism anymore. Capitalism is a very sensitive entity, idea. Capitalism is weak. Capitalism is very weak. It takes very little effort.
Are you saying that capitalism is effeminate?
That's not what I said.
You say it's sensitive and weak. This sounds like an ancient Greek argument for something being effeminate.
Yeah, well, maybe, but that's
Well, I'd say that might be the stock market, right?
that's not what I'm saying.
The stock market is incredibly effeminate.
Again, I'll take your word for it, but that's not something I'm saying. But the problem with capitalism is that capitalism basically is a fine balance.
Volatile.
And we haven't seen that balance. I mean, we've talked about that balance, and we would like to see that balance. And that there are countries that are close to that balance. Because again, if we look at the Scandinavian countries, I think when it comes to free enterprise, the Scandinavian countries score. The Scandinavian economy scores as freer than the American economy. The Scandinavian countries are more capitalistic than America is. America is very protectionistic of its bigger economies, its bigger companies, its Googles, its pharma industry, its financials industry. They're being propped up. Whereas in capitalism, a company should be free to fail. But in the Western world, we have a lot of companies that we are now considering too big to fail.
Too big.
And that's weird. Because that means that our capitalistic system turned into a totalitarian system. Because if you're too big to fail, that means I need to protect you from failing. Which then means you can do whatever the fuck you want because I will make sure you won't fail.
Too big to fail. Too big to fail is when a 500-pound obese man needs to be kept alive by everyone else's tax dollars.
Yes, that's a good example. So are we then talking about capitalism?
I thought that was rather funny.
So yeah.
We don't seem to be talking about pure capitalism or pure communism.
To me, it's like an abusive boyfriend or girlfriend. Look what you made me do.
Yeah. And we're not talking about pure anything. That is true. Though the bad name.
I mean, I know the argument. There's no such thing as pure gold, but
well, there is that. But if we're talking about capitalism, we have a. Well, that's not true. Economics have a pretty good idea what capitalism is and what it's not. Yeah, see you soon, Paolo. Hope to see you Saturday and otherwise next week. We have reached the 2-hour market. So maybe we should talk about capitalism next time.
okay.
Otherwise, you know, the thing with me is I'm very prone on keep going. But I kind of want to try and hold on to that 2-hour marker.
That seems fair enough to me.
Yeah. So is there anything you would like to say to our lovely guests? or would the lovely guests like to say something back, I will give the stream a few minutes to respond, and then I'm going to call it quits. And I would personally like to thank both, well, not both, all of the people who joined me. So that's the two plebs, I forgot his name, who left
John.
earlier. Yeah. Sky and St. Clair and Real Raven. And somewhere in the background we could hear the Devil's Advocate a few times. So I'd like to thank every one of those that they have given their time to join us here.
Yeah, thank you for giving us the opportunity. We appreciate it.
Well,
Yeah,
it's
thanks for
been a
having us.
while. I mean, I moved the streaming thing to its own channel, and
been-
you guys haven't been here yet. I mean, you streamed with me on Modwayne's channel, but not on this one. This, by the way, will be where my live streams will happen. Not just
Oh,
mine.
no.
If other people want to live stream but can't, they can do it here as well. So if ever you want to do a live stream but you haven't a channel to do it on, by all means feel free to come. Okay.
Thank you.
Real Raven, any last words?
Yeah, just wish me luck for tomorrow, because it's probably my last chance to get our well going again. Getting the well driller to have a look why my pump is stuck down there.
Okay, well, good luck.
It's the joys of living off the grid, you know, at least the water grid.
Yes.
Nice while it works.
Nice while it worked. Well, good luck tomorrow, mate.
Thank you.
Sky, anything you want to add?
No. Thank you though.
Yeah,
Thanks for
you're more than welcome. St. Clair?
I will definitely be here next week.
I'll do my best to be here as well.
That would be nice. I'm not sure if the devil's still with you in the room.
No, not at the moment. He stepped outside. He had to talk to his lawyer.
Ah, okay. Well, in that case, I'd like to thank everyone for coming, both in the stream and outside, and I hope to see you all next time. And this is where I say yes, and of course YouTube is really difficult in that, but hope to see you.